Alright, so after checking out, like, the Pandamons from Kinera, I was a little conflicted about what I was working with, but they've also sent me another IM. This is a much more high-end IM. This is their Idun Golden, and, yeah, so this is the second version of it, so there was a first, but, you know, I can't compare because I only got the second right here, so let's check it out. Starting with the box, you can tell it's a little bit different Juzu shape, and it feels to be a lot more premium, and this is also said within the manual, which I normally throw and blow up, but in this case, I just gotta show you it because it is very unique in the way that it's designed and opens up, and while I'll never read it, I think it's a really nice touch. But other than that, inside the box, you're gonna get the IEMs, as well as a carrying case, which contains our cable, a bag of foam tips, and an IEM brush, and inside the box, you'll also get adapters for a 4.4mm balance adapter, as well as an unbalanced 1/4" adapter. You also get what they call their balanced ear tips, as well as their vocal ear tips, which should technically affect the sound in your ear, but this is also very fit and seal dependent, because ears are very weird and everyone's different. Starting with the cable, this is definitely one of their nicer silver plated cables with a very nice braided design, a metal 3.5mm jack, which comes with protection, but we're not going to need that. Also, this jack is removable from the cable, and you can change it to the 4.4mm balance jack in case you're using some balanced equipment, which typically will use this type of jack. At the split is a nice metal barrel splitter, as well as a metal bead chin slider. And of course, at the end are nice metal 2-pin connectors on ear hooks. Now, as for the IEMs themselves, we got this very nice, pretty Nordic theme to them, with a Norse tree with Kinera's little branding on them, cleverly. Now, the shell of the IEM, I believe, is made of resin and is 3D printed to fit into the Asian ear, or the auricle of the Asian ear. A little ironic considering the Norse theme, but we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the fit. But one can assume by the pre-molded style that it should be pretty comfortable, much like on the Blessings 2 from Moondrop. Now, up top are the 2-pin connectors, and as you can see here, the nozzles are in one piece with the body, and there is no grill, much like on many higher-end IEMs, actually. Now, returning to the fit of them on your ears, they were designed for Asian ears, supposedly, which I think is true, because out of all the IEMs that are pre-molded that I've ever tested, these have been the most comfortable ones I've ever had, as I do have Asian ears. I'm going to guess that by Asian ears, they went by East Asian and Southeast Asian kind of ear shapes, so if you're one of those people, it might fit you really nicely. If you're not, it might just fit you okay. I can't exactly say for sure, because everyone's ears are a little bit different, but from what I can tell here, these are super comfortable with my ears. And this in part has a lot to do with the fact that these IEMs are very, very light, and I can wear these for long hours on end without any pain or fatigue. And as for looks, they're a little bit flashy, but at least they don't physically stick out too much. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about the sound of these guys. So these guys have more of a neutral-ish kind of leaning sound with a more of like a mid to high focus, so both of those will be a little bit more forward than, say, the bass. And this thus means that the bass is on the softer side. It's not like the main star of the show here, but even then, it still has a pretty good reach down to the sub-bass region to bring up some rumble, but like I said, being on the softer end of the spectrum, the rumble isn't the strongest, so it's like a soft rumble, and if you move up while the bass does get a little stronger, it is still sort of a soft punch, both of which will be like still felt, but just not very strongly, so it's sort of a neutral, leaning, balanced bass that a audiophile might appreciate, with just an adequate amount of bass that feels very natural and clean. Someone who loves bass or like is a bass head will probably not like it at all, so you know, do bear that in mind. This, however, does let the mids and the highs shine a lot more, as if those weren't already, you know, forward and shining in their own right. Now, this doesn't mean that they're like super forward, they're just like slightly forward. Like with the mid region, it is very clean, very detailed, and you know, like I said, slightly forward, so it brings out some of those notes. However, it is not so detailed that it'll be like super analytical or sterile. There's some smoothness to it, so it's not too granular with the details, and it's like trying to give you details while still remaining musical. This, however, does change as you go into the highs, as those are far more detailed and start getting a little bit more granular and slightly more on the analytical end of the spectrum. Then this brings in a few things, unfortunately. While the highs have a pretty good reach really high up, there is a point where it starts to lose a little bit of control, and it introduces some harshness and sibilance, and this can be occasionally felt if you're listening to tracks or playing games with a lot of high notes playing constantly, and that's not exactly very good if you're high sensitive. Ironically, for some people, if you're going to be using these for games, this will actually be sort of a good thing, because it becomes like a signifier in games, so you can hear things early as like a warning sign, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's first get into soundstage and imaging. Now, the soundstage of these guys is definitely on the larger side for IEMs. It's quite spacious, having a really good amount of width and a pretty okay amount of depth, so you're going to get an over-layer sounding stage with height that's just okay. It's not that great, to be honest, and I honestly expect that for most of it, or for most IEMs, so you know, that's it's about normal. I wish there was a little bit more, though, especially if I'm, you know, because that would be useful in some games. Now, as for the imaging and, like, the sound separation, I think it was pretty darn good, honestly. Like, it utilized the stage pretty well. The sound separation was pretty good, giving like an ample amount of information, like auditorially, for you to separate sounds to help you pinpoint sounds a lot better. It utilizes the width of the stage very, very well, and this is good for games. However, there are some detriments, such as the depth, and then, let's get into gaming now that we're on it. So regarding like the stage shape and size in games, like the size was good, but the shape wasn't always the greatest. I felt the width was just significantly greater than the depth, and this sometimes led to a little bit of confusion when it comes to like tracking enemies and trying to pinpoint people. You would have to kind of like adjust how you hear, that way you can like figure out where those diagonals are due to how great the width is compared to the depth. So there is that. On the other hand, I do think that the sound was really good for competitive games, allowing for like really great pinpointing abilities once you get adjusted to like the shape of the soundstage. The tuning of the mids and the highs were very beneficial in like tracking and bringing out those footstep sounds for me to like look for them, and the bass, while not being like super present, was there enough to keep the sound from not being like too boring, giving a little bit extra detail to the sounds without getting in the way. Now when it comes to non-competitive games, these still did a pretty good job, despite not having like a crazy amount of bass. They were still pretty enjoyable and immersive. I think that the size of the stage and the presentation of those details within that stage was pretty nice in those games, though I do still kind of wish there was a little bit more feel in the bass to give more weight and body to the experience. Like, I just think some sounds in the game just could have used more oomph when I saw them and heard them to give more impact, to really pull me into like the experience. Now, a problem that I personally ran into when it came to playing games in general as a whole, that due to the tuning of the mids and the highs, sometimes it can be a bit fatiguing depending on which game you're playing. Like if the game has a lot of highs going on, like constantly hitting you in the head with those sounds, you're definitely gonna feel a little bit fatigued. But if you're not so high sensitive, then maybe you're not, because everyone hears a little bit differently. But if you are high adverse, then do note that it can be a bit much on you. Of course, this will be like you dependent as well as game dependent, so there is that, or situations in game dependent as well. And on that note, I should just remind people that sound is subjective depending on like what you like, what you're sensitive to, what your ears can hear and sometimes can't hear, and what type of games you play. When it comes to then making your choice of IEMs, you should bear those in mind. But that being said, I'm hoping I hit at least around the ballpark, and from what I can hear from these guys is I would think these things are more preferable if you're playing more competitive shooter games, due to the tuning of them just being very mid and high focused and having that granular detail to give you information for hunting people in games. Is it super perfect in pinpointing? No, but I still think it was still very accurate. The sound of these guys almost remind me a little bit of like the Tin T2s, only like a lot better. So I guess if you're like someone who's been using the Tin T2s and you want like a really big upgrade, these might be it, especially if you have Asian ears like mine, whatever that means, because that just makes it more comfortable. As some of you may know, the Tin T2's comfort kind of varied a bit, as they didn't really have too much of a shape to them. These things are more molded, so you might find them very comfortable. But that being said, if you do want to purchase these are something you're into, I'll leave a link down in the description, and that's basically it. These are definitely good hunter IEMs, I think. They remind me a lot of the Tin T2s, like I said. So, that being said, I'll see you guys next time.